On June 22, 1941, the world witnessed the launch of Operation Barbarossa, the largest and most ambitious land invasion in human history. In the early hours of that fateful morning, the silence along the vast Soviet border was shattered by the thunder of artillery, the roar of engines, and the relentless advance of over 3 million Axis soldiers. This was not just a military campaign, it was a gamble of unprecedented scale, one that would decide the fate of millions and alter the course of the Second World War. Hitler's vision of a vast German empire stretching deep into the east, fueled by dreams of Lebensraum and the destruction of Bolshevism, drove over 3 million Axis soldiers into the heart of the Soviet Union, shattering the fragile non-aggression pact that had, until then, kept the two powers at uneasy peace. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, once a shield, was now nothing more than a broken promise, swept aside by the tides of war. The Wehrmacht, emboldened by its lightning victories in Western Europe, believed itself unstoppable. Confident in their tactics and technology, German commanders devised a bold plan. The invasion force would split into 3 massive army groups, each with a distinct and ambitious objective. Media, animated map dividing army groups north, center, south, Wehrmacht leaders planning Barbarossa, German army columns splitting on Eastern Front. Army Group North would drive relentlessly toward Leningrad, seeking to capture the symbolic city on the Baltic Sea. Army Group Center, the largest and most powerful, was tasked with the direct assault on Moscow, the Soviet capital, and the heart of its political power. Meanwhile, Army Group South surged into the fertile lands of Ukraine, aiming to seize its vast agricultural and industrial resources, which Hitler believed were essential for sustaining the German war machine. The Germans relied on their proven blitzkrieg tactics, fast-moving panzers, devastating airstrikes, and coordinated infantry assaults to overwhelm Soviet defenses. The plan was simple: crush the Red Army quickly, before the infamous Russian winter could set in and turn the tide. Stalin, caught off guard by the sudden betrayal, was initially paralyzed by shock and disbelief. Soviet forces, unprepared and poorly positioned, were quickly encircled and destroyed in massive battles of annihilation. Entire armies vanished, and the Red Army seemed on the brink of collapse. Yet the Germans had gravely underestimated 2 crucial factors: the sheer vastness of the Soviet Union and the resilience of its people. The endless Russian steppes, dense forests, and treacherous rivers became obstacles that slowed the German advance. Meanwhile, Soviet civilians and soldiers alike began to mobilize for a desperate defense, digging trenches, sabotaging supply lines, and preparing for a long struggle. The 3-pronged strategy, while bold, stretched German resources dangerously thin. Supply lines grew longer and more vulnerable with every mile, and the Wehrmacht soon found itself bogged down by mud, exhaustion, and the sheer scale of the territory it sought to conquer. As the campaign dragged on, Hitler's indecision between striking at Moscow or diverting forces to Ukraine led to confusion and costly delays. The lack of a clear, unified objective at the highest levels of command proved to be a fatal flaw in the German strategy. The German High Command had assumed the Soviet Union would collapse quickly under the weight of their assault. Instead, they found themselves locked in a prolonged, bloody conflict, marked by brutal battles, staggering casualties, and the destruction of entire towns and cities. The road to victory, once envisioned as a swift and decisive campaign, became a nightmarish ordeal. Berlin's planners, who had once dreamed of triumph, now faced the grim reality of a war without end, their hopes dashed by the stubborn resistance of the Soviet people and the unforgiving Russian landscape. In the end, the seeds of Germany's undoing were sown in its own grand strategy, a 3-pronged gamble that underestimated its enemy, overreached its own capabilities, and set the stage for a conflict that would ultimately consume the Nazi regime itself. In the summer of 1941, Army Group North surged forward with remarkable speed, pushing relentlessly through the Baltic states. German columns rolled through Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, capturing city after city as they advanced deeper into Soviet territory. The Wehrmacht's rapid progress stunned both the local populations and the Soviet defenders, who struggled to mount an effective defense in the face of the German blitzkrieg. The ultimate objective was Leningrad, a city not only of immense strategic value, but also a powerful symbol of Bolshevik power and Russian resilience. Capturing Leningrad would deal a devastating blow to Soviet morale and disrupt vital supply lines. However, the advance was far from easy. The region's dense forests, treacherous swamps, and poorly maintained roads bogged down German vehicles and supply convoys. Mud and rain turned the landscape into a quagmire, slowing the offensive and straining logistics. Despite being caught off guard, Soviet forces mounted a determined resistance. Though often disorganized and outgunned, Red Army units and local partisans fought fiercely, ambushing German patrols and defending key positions. This unexpected tenacity inflicted significant casualties and delayed the German timetable. By late August 1941, the noose tightened. Leningrad was effectively cut off by land, with German forces encircling the city from the south and east, while Finnish allies pressed from the north, further isolating the city from the rest of the Soviet Union. On September 8, the siege officially began. Millions of civilians found themselves trapped inside Leningrad's walls, facing an uncertain and terrifying future. The city's population braced for the worst as food supplies dwindled and the threat of bombardment loomed. Hitler's orders were ruthless and uncompromising. Leningrad was to be wiped from the map through relentless blockade and bombardment. No mercy was to be shown to its inhabitants. Starvation and destruction were the chosen weapons. The German plan was simple and brutal: starve the city into submission. As supplies ran out, hunger and desperation spread rapidly among the population, with ration lines growing longer and food becoming increasingly scarce. Confident in their strategy, the Wehrmacht dug in for a prolonged siege, establishing fortified positions and heavy artillery emplacements around the city's perimeter, certain that Leningrad would soon fall. Yet the people of Leningrad refused to surrender. Civilians and soldiers alike worked tirelessly to build barricades, dig trenches, and organize defenses. The city's resilience and unity in the face of catastrophe became legendary. The Siege of Leningrad would become one of the most brutal and harrowing episodes in the history of warfare, marked by unimaginable suffering, destruction, and loss of life. Though the city's fate seemed sealed, its spirit remained unbroken. Against all odds, the people of Leningrad endured, their defiance and courage shining through the darkest days of the siege. The encirclement of Leningrad marked the start of a brutal siege. The Luftwaffe targeted the city's food reserves, leading to catastrophic fires. As winter set in, food rations dwindled to starvation levels. The cold was merciless, with temperatures plummeting and heating systems failing. Death became a daily occurrence, with sleds used to transport the dead. Despite the horror, Leningrad's spirit endured. The city's defenders fought with courage, and cultural life persisted. Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony became a symbol of defiance. The siege transformed Leningrad into a frozen necropolis. Yet, the city's resilience became a symbol of Soviet defiance. The siege was a testament to human endurance in the face of annihilation. Leningrad's spirit did not break even as its people suffered. The city's resistance became a powerful symbol of hope. The road of life across Lake Ladoga was Leningrad's lifeline. When the lake froze, a perilous supply route was established. German artillery and the Luftwaffe constantly threatened the ice road. Drivers braved harsh conditions, knowing each delivery was vital. The road also evacuated civilians, reducing the city's burden. Engineers monitored the ice, shifting routes as needed. In spring, barges continued the supply mission under threat. The road of life never ended starvation but prevented collapse. It was a symbol of hope, allowing Leningrad to endure. The city's survival depended on this fragile lifeline. Army Group Center's success at Smolensk opened the path to Moscow. Generals urged an immediate drive to the capital, but Hitler hesitated. Obsessed with Kiev's Soviet forces and Ukraine's resources, he diverted troops south. The Kiev victory was tactical but delayed the Moscow offensive. This pause allowed the Soviets to regroup and fortify Moscow. By the time the Germans resumed their advance, conditions had changed. The delay squandered Germany's best chance to capture Moscow. Hitler's indecision cost Germany the war on the Eastern Front. In the autumn of 1941, Operation Typhoon was launched by Nazi Germany with a single ambitious goal: to encircle and capture Moscow, the heart of the Soviet Union. This massive offensive was intended to deliver a decisive blow, ending the war on the Eastern Front before winter set in. German commanders believed that taking the Soviet capital would cripple Soviet resistance and force a surrender. At first, the German advance was swift and brutal. Their armored divisions and infantry columns smashed through Soviet defensive lines, overwhelming poorly prepared Red Army units. The Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg tactics, which had proven so effective in Western Europe, seemed unstoppable as they pushed ever closer to Moscow. As news of the German advance spread, panic swept through Moscow. Civilians fled the city in droves, fearing occupation and destruction. Yet, in a moment of remarkable resolve, Joseph Stalin chose to remain in the capital. His decision to stay rather than evacuate sent a powerful message to both the military and the people, bolstering morale and determination to defend the city at all costs. Ordinary citizens, alongside soldiers, worked tirelessly to transform Moscow into a fortress. They dug trenches, built barricades, and prepared for street-to-street fighting. The entire city mobilized for a desperate, last-ditch defense, determined not to let the enemy take their home. However, nature soon intervened. The infamous Russian autumn, known as the Rasputitsa, brought relentless rains that turned roads into seas of mud. German vehicles became hopelessly bogged down, supply lines faltered, and the rapid advance ground to a halt. The Soviets seized this crucial pause to reinforce their defenses. Fresh troops arrived, anti-tank obstacles were erected, and the Red Army prepared for the inevitable renewed assault. Every hour gained was precious for the defenders. By mid-November, the ground finally froze, allowing German forces to resume their push. But now, they faced a new enemy, the bitter Russian winter. Temperatures plummeted, and snow blanketed the landscape, making every step forward a struggle. Some German units managed to reach the very outskirts of Moscow. The city's skyline was visible in the distance, tantalizingly close. Yet the offensive began to stall as resistance stiffened and conditions worsened. German troops, exhausted and ill-equipped for the harsh winter, suffered terribly. Many lacked proper winter clothing and supplies. Frostbite, hunger, and fatigue took a heavy toll, sapping the strength of the once mighty Wehrmacht. The combination of the Rasputitsa's mud and the Soviets' unyielding defense proved insurmountable. German advances slowed, then stopped altogether, as Soviet forces held firm in the face of adversity. The German offensive, so promising at first, finally ran out of steam just short of its ultimate goal. The exhausted invaders could go no further. In December, the Red Army launched a powerful counteroffensive, catching the Germans off guard. The Battle of Moscow became a dramatic turning point, as Soviet troops pushed the invaders back from the gates of the capital. For the first time in the war, the German army suffered a major defeat. Thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, and the myth of German invincibility was shattered. The failure to capture Moscow marked a decisive moment. The Wehrmacht's aura of unstoppable power was broken, and the tide of the war began to turn in favor of the Soviets. As the German advance stalled, the Soviets prepared a counter-offensive. Siberian divisions, fresh and winter-ready, were secretly transferred to Moscow. On December 5, 1941, Zhukov launched a surprise attack. The Germans, exhausted and unprepared, were forced into retreat. Hitler's refusal to allow withdrawal led to horrific casualties. The Battle of Moscow was a decisive Soviet victory. It marked the beginning of a long, grinding war of attrition. The Soviet victory ensured the survival of the USSR. The Siege of Leningrad and the Battle of Moscow were intertwined. The decision to besiege Leningrad diverted resources from the Moscow offensive. Experienced troops and supplies were tied down in the north. Soviet attempts to break the siege forced Germans to commit reserves. The fighting drained German strength needed for Moscow. Hitler's obsession with Leningrad created a strategic dilemma. Resources pinned in the north weakened the central front. Leningrad's defense contributed to Moscow's survival. The siege's impact on the Moscow offensive was profound. The campaigns against Leningrad and Moscow highlighted Hitler's strategic blunders. The diversion to Kiev was a tactical victory but a strategic disaster. It squandered time and momentum, allowing Soviet defenses to strengthen. Hitler's fixation on Leningrad drained resources from the Moscow offensive. The human cost was immense, with millions of casualties. The failure to capture either city sealed Germany's fate. The war became a protracted conflict Germany couldn't win. The losses in 1941 were irreplaceable. The twin battles marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. Hitler's obsession overruled reason, leading to ultimate defeat. The Eastern Front became a war of attrition Germany couldn't sustain.